usually something that's maintained by the HOA. In a condo, like almost everything, I mean, almost everything is maintained by the HOA except for some of the interior stuff, right? So, so you can have a home inspection on that stuff and it'll keep your eye open to things that need to be repaired. But as far as like your client being able to affect the repair on that directly, it's not as big, right? But when it comes to the financial status of the HOA,
I'm sure you have the wrong screen shared. There you go.
okay.
No more
Sorry,
bugging, I
Tracy.
promise. No more bugging.
Sorry, Tracy. But when it comes to the health of the HOA, that's what's actually going to affect the change on the structure long term. There's a condo unit, there's a condo community. I've actually sold 3 condos in this community in Mountain Park. It's on the Portland Public School side of Mountain Park. And it's in terrible shape. Like the HOA has been so poorly run. There's so much deferred maintenance on these buildings. It's just terrible. Like every time I've sold something in there, I hold my breath that somebody doesn't come after me for because they're in such terrible shape. The last one I sold in there was a ground floor, the lowest level unit. I went in there. My client had purchased it with his friend when they got out of college. His friend stayed there. He moved to like Spokane or something like that. And then they decided they were going to move out. The friend moved out. They're going to sell the condo. I went to go look at it for the first time and I couldn't shut the sliding glass door. It wouldn't shut. It was left wide open. Nobody got called. Why is it open? Yeah, he couldn't get it shut either. The reason why is because there was so much dry rot in the backside of that building that the only thing really holding it up was frame on the sliding glass door. Like, big deal, huge problems, right? Okay. And so an inspector would have found that out. But more importantly, like you find out the inspector tells you there's this big issue. He may or may not have found that out. He would have noticed that you can't shut the door and ask you why. And an engineer would have come out and said, oh, that's because there's nothing but dry rot. The whole backside of the building needs to get rebuilt. Right. So that you'd discover in the home inspection maybe. But what you would find out if you looked at the HOA documents is there's no money to pay for it. There was no money to pay for it. And so they had to specially assess everybody to pay. They had to specially assess the entire community to pay for it. Right. And so they go in tandem, right? Then I think the HOA documents are much more important probably than the home inspection. So there are companies that you can pay that will review the HOA documents for your client, or your client can pay. It's about $400 or $500, and they will take a long look at the health of the HOA. This is what they do for a living. They can look at the reserve studies. You guys know what a reserve study is? A reserve study is a prediction of the future costs to maintain the structures in the community, right? But guess what's happened in the last year? What's happened in the last year? Right, inflation, right? So all the old those projections probably aren't accurate anymore, right? So just about every condo community in Portland, in Oregon, in the United States, is probably going to face shortages here because the cost of goods have gone up so much, the cost of labor has gone up so much that what it used to cost $30,000 to redo the parking lot is going to cost $50,000 now, and it used to cost $150,000 to redo all the roofs in the community. Now it's $300,000. So like those are big effect. That's a big effect on your client. So if you have a client who's looking to buy a condo, townhome, I would hire a company that does this for a living, who can actually look at these numbers and say, oh yeah, that's accurate or that's not accurate. Like you should expect this or not expect this. I would hire someone to do that. Yes.
So what if we recommend that to our buyer client and they say, oh, I don't want to pay that $500.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. Right. It's your trouble. Like, yes, your choice. That's their choice, right?
I mean, as long as I recommended it.
Yeah, as long as you've recommended it, you suggested it. I mean, you are like the review of the HOA documents. The legalese in here writes your responsibility so far out of it, right? It's not really your duty to do that. But as providing good customer service and trying to build clients for life, because usually your condo buyer is probably their first home, and you want to buy a second, right? So you want to get them into a good community, and you want to get them, and you want to be able to retain them as clients. So, okay, let's read through this real fast. The property that is subject to of this transaction includes a residence located within a planned community as defined in the ORS chapter, 94, There exists a homeowners association, which is collectively the HOA, which is responsible for one or more expenses relating to the property and or certain limited or general common elements. It is highly recommended buyer employ the use of a third-party professional familiar with townhomes or planned unit developments, their associations, governments, budgets, finances, and reserves. Seller is not required to provide documents under this addendum that have already been provided with the ORF 001 residential real estate sale agreement, as such other disclosures as may be legally required for the sale of new homes or condominiums under this chapter and chapter 100. Seller and buyer agree this addendum shall become part of the real estate sale agreement between them. Okay. And so association documents. Buyer acknowledges that it's buyer's primary responsibility to conduct a thorough and complete review of all aspects of the property being purchased, including but not limited to its association assessments, budgets, reserves, general and limited common elements, as well as governance documents as soon as they become available. It is highly recommended buyer employs the use of a professional familiar with townhome plan community homeowners associations and their governments. Neither buyer or seller's agents can render advice on these matters, nor shall they be responsible for advising buyer on these matters. Right? So that writes you guys out of it. Okay. Now, your clients, if they ever get in a situation where there's a problem, they're probably going to say, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me this was wrong? And it was in here. They didn't read it. This is where we get into the gray areas. Yeah.
Do you have like an HOA review like company that you recommend?
I do. We had them. I don't remember their name. You have to ask me about it later. I have it. We had him on a call. He took up the entire meeting. He wouldn't stop. He was just going on and on and on and on, but he had a ton of information. But it's really important. Like, I really think, like, if I would almost pay for it for my clients. Like, and I don't know if that's legal or not, but like, it seems like if you're trying to absolve risk, you're less likely to get in trouble. I mean, paying for it and them being wrong has its own, if you refer somebody and they screw up, then that's kind of on you too. So you're always, we can't always skirt risk. But these people know a lot more about it than you do. And it's like, because that's what they do all day. Like, assessing whether or not a reserve study is accurate or not, that's like actuary, like big math, like a lot of data points that you don't have, right? And that your client, there's no way they have it. Like, how could they possibly, like, do they have like some sort of sliding scale where they can talk, where they can go, okay, so the roof, it's a 30-year roof, but it only lasts 20, and the cost in 20 years to replace that roof is going to be, like, we don't have access to that information. Your clients certainly don't have access to that information. So that's why they suggest hiring out somebody to do it for you. And that's what I would absolutely do. Okay. And this is where the contingency gets built. All right. And this is why I think it should be above that line. It should be in the contingency section. Within blank business days, and it says 7. And if you're going to use a review company, you're going to probably need more than 7 business days. Okay. So I put in 10. This is it because it's a big deal. It's a big contingency. After the date buyer and seller have both signed and accepted this agreement, seller agrees at seller's expense to provide buyer with copies of all documents and information, collectively called documents, described below, seller's delivery period, which we're creating capitalized terms there. Note, not all documents may be readily available to seller. Some documents may already be available to buyer through other disclosure documents required under Oregon law. Some important information may be available to buyer in a summary form. Buyers, sellers, and agents should promptly determine what documents are necessary and can be reasonably provided within the review period defined below. If obtaining buyer requested documents may cause any delay, it is suggested that the buyer and seller reach an agreement for an extension of time of seller's delivery period in the written and signed addendum. And then it used to be a checkbox here where you would just check the things that you wanted to receive, but now they've removed that. And it's just all of these documents right here should be delivered. The problem is, and this is the rub, and like in other states, like if you were to go to Arizona, these would all be like in statutory forms. Every condominium place you went to would have the exact same looking form with their own information on it. But in Oregon, it's not regulated like that. You may not get all these, or they may be named something entirely different, right? So it makes it hard. Another reason to hire a company.
Oh, so if you hired a company, do they request all of these?
They
from the
review.
HOA?
They review. You're
How
gonna
do
have
you
to.
work with an HOA that's like, does not give you the documents?
Then you're, yeah. What are you gonna do?
Like,
So
is there anything you can do?
no,
No.
but they may not have them. I mean, and that'd be a little bit of, like, some of these forms are statutory. Like some of this stuff they do. Some of these forms they have to have. Like they have to have a reserve study. They have to have the meeting minutes and stuff like that. But sometimes they don't. Like you'll have a self-managed HOA where they're not having meetings as often as they should, and they haven't spent the money to have a reserve study, and they aren't keeping up on this paperwork. And then you got to ask your client has to ask themselves, well, is this where I want to live? Right?
And so is there, sorry.
You're good. Just speak up. You're good.
As a listing agent, are you technically liable if you can't get these documents to the buyer's agent in time? Okay.
No.
So you just tell them like, hey, I've tried like multiple times.
Yeah.
And wow.
Yeah.
God, that feels so like.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Right.
okay.
Well, what you do in that situation, you're a listing agent, you're going to be talking to your seller like, hey, I can't get this information from the HOA. This is going to be critical. Like how I'm building it up as for your buyers, how critical it is. As a listing agent, it's going to be equally critical, right? Because you got to give this information so the buyer can make a full decision. They may make half a decision and it may be the wrong decision, right? So they may not, if you don't provide the information, if you can't get the information, then you're likely to have a sale fail. If they're withholding information that they should give, now we're talking about fraud, right? There's this cute little condominium association called, I can't remember what it's called. It's right on the corner. It's in Beaverton, right off of Allen, the corner of Allen and Erickson. It's like these white little, you know what I'm talking about? They're cute, right? And then, what's that?
I live next door.
Yeah, right. I've sold those, and I've purchased and sold those. And when purchasing them, you just get the HOA documents. And you're like, oh, this is healthy and great, no problem. And then a week after you purchase, a lady from the homeowners association calls up and says, oh, so is your wiring updated? What? Well, if you have aluminum wiring, you have to change it all. What? Yeah, you have to change it all. Well, how? Well, how are you forcing me to do that? Well, because it's not safe for the other units. What are you talking about? Yeah, there's like a little caveat to condominium rules that a homeowners association for the safety of the other units can enforce things like changing out the wiring of the property. It doesn't appear anywhere in the meeting minutes, nowhere, because we looked at it. We actually had a company look at them, like a team look at them, nothing at all. And then we get this phone call and I was livid. And we thought about going after the seller for not telling us because it's something that should have been disclosed. Like that there's this person whose mission it is to get all the aluminum wiring in those condominiums switched out. And they have some authority to force you to do it.
And when you say force you to do it, does that mean like what would happen if?
They could start fining you. The HOA could start fining you. Yeah.
Is it possible that seller doesn't know whether there is a HOA or not?
Well, they're probably paying dues. Yeah. I mean, there could be a situation. Let's say mom passed away and she was living in a condominium and you weren't that close to mom and you don't know. I mean, if you're living in a condo, you're paying HOA dues. But let's say you're living in a planned community with a house and you didn't realize that it wasn't a planned community. Like, let's say they bought something over here in Summerfield, right? We drive through there and we probably as realtors realize that's an HOA community, but maybe you're coming from across the country, you wouldn't really realize that. Yeah, you may not know, but if you review the financials, it's going to come up and it's going to come up on the title report. And if you as an agent's going to realize it when you look it up, you probably would do, as long as you're doing your due diligence, trying to figure out as much as you can about the property, you probably would have figured out there's a homeowners association along the way. Like when you're doing, when you're doing comps and stuff for different properties, that'd be something to look at. Like, okay, I'm looking for comps that are in the same neighborhood. I don't know if there's an HOA or not. I should probably check to see. Because an HOA doesn't always charge you too. It could just be they also manage the the CCNRs. They have a design review committee that decides what you can and can't do with exterior property. So that's another component to this. And another reason why you shouldn't, like, I had buyers ask me, is there anything that CCNRs I should be concerned about? You guys know what CCNRs are?
Covenants.
Boom. Is there anything there I should be concerned about? I don't know. Like, what are you gonna do with the property? Like, do you want to paint it a certain way? How heavy is your dog? You know, like, are you gonna park an RV at the property? Like, there's a lot of weird things in CCNRs that you may not know about. So I would never answer that question for my client. I'd be like, maybe, like, you should really read them. Like, you're gonna have to adhere to these rules, so you better know what they are. Otherwise, you're foolish. Like, we have something that went on, and I don't know if it's gonna, I don't know what the outcome is gonna be, but we represented a buyer, and that buyer assigned their rights to purchase the property to another buyer a week before closing. The people who ended up buying the property the week before closing, right, who jumped in place, they took our buyer just locked up the property and then found somebody else who wanted to buy it, and they moved them in, and then like 5 days before closing.
Like a wholesale?
Yes, it'd be like a wholesaler. I don't know if they're really wholesalers. These people typically close on properties, but for this reason, they just knew somebody who wanted it, I think, and they just slipped them in. What they didn't do is read their CCNRs, because they were putting in a home care facility, like an elderly facility at the home, and the CCNRs didn't allow for it. And so these people bought this property without knowing. And they actually did a bunch of renovations, and then they got a letter from HOA saying, you can't do that. So how's that going to come out? I don't know. Like, we have issues on that. All right. So anyways, I digress. Okay. So these are all the documents. I'm not going to go over them specifically because they may or may not be in this form, or may or may not be named that. But I just asked for everything from the seller's agent, and I expect to get it all. And we just pour it over to the buyer and say, review these, or give it to the management company or the review company and have them look at it. Okay, here's a cure to the yeah. Oh, did you raise a hand? Sorry. Okay, commencing on the next business day following the delivery of available documents to buyer. Buyer shall have blank business days if not filled in, 5 if not filled in, to review the documents and any additional documents requested by buyer. If buyer notifies seller in writing prior to 5 p.m. on the last day of the review period of buyer's unconditional disapproval of any of the documents or additional documents provided, all earnest money deposits will promptly be refunded to buyer, and this transaction shall be terminated. If buyer fails to provide seller with written unconditional approval of documents provided by seller by 5 p.m. of the end of the review period, buyer shall be deemed to have approved the same. So the review period, that right there, right, is established right up here. Okay, right in here, in this paragraph, the timeline is set forth here. So again, make sure you're managing your timelines as a buyer's agent. And then down here is where the information about the HOA would go in here. As a buyer's agent, you would fill this out, and the seller would have to correct anything you have that's wrong. There could be 2 HOAs. Like, I live in Mountain Park, right? I live on that 46 Touchstone. Up the street's Tanglewood condominiums. They're part of HOA, the Mountain Park HOA, but they're also part of the Tanglewood HOA. So they're paying 2 separate HOAs. My neighbors on Hotspur around the corner, they have their own little tiny HOA embedded within our HOA. So they can be parts of multiple HOAs. So they all need to be disclosed. Okay. You guys got a handle on this review period a little bit? Okay. Sorry, everybody. Why am I there? Okay. Okay, so we'll continue on here. So if there's an alarm system, it's indicated here. I typically just de facto go unknown because it's so hard to tell these days. Smoke/carbon monoxide detectors. So it's Oregon law that every sale must have like a new smoke alarm and a carbon monoxide alarm, and they need to be within a certain distance of bedrooms and on each level. This ensures that it's supposed to be done in a certain time period. 15 days is the de facto timeline on this, but it's quite possible that within 15 business days, your buyer client will have already had their appraisal done. And the appraiser comes out and finds out that this stuff isn't done right. He's going to say, well, I need this stuff done. So I'm either going to have to, if you're lucky, just take photos of it and send it to him. More times than not, the appraiser's like, I'm going to charge you to your client, your buyer, to go back out there. I'm going to charge him $250 for me to go back out there and verify that they think that these things have been done. And so if you put 15 business days in there and the sellers put it in on the 15th business day, but on the 14th business day, the appraiser came out and saw they weren't there, there was no breach of contract. And your buyer would have to pay that $250. If they, let's say you put 10 business days or 5 business days or 7 business days there, and the appraiser came out the following business day and they weren't there, well, now the sellers breached the contract, and you could say, you guys got to pay this for us. They probably won't, but at least you've got a contractual argument to make. You know, they may or may not pay it. It's very typical, but it's very important that this stuff gets done. It's also in our listing agreement. So if you're showing an RMLS listing, the sellers actually already agreed to do this because you're selling a listing that's an RMLS. It's part of the RMLS listing agreement that they've already that they're going to do this before putting the house on the sale up for sale. Doesn't happen a lot. It's a very common problem, and oftentimes the buyer's left holding the purse on that. But if you do it right and you push back on the seller's agent, and you know that Section 19 addresses this, and they agreed to address it within however many business days, you've got some leverage for that to get paid for. Smart home features. Does the property contain any smart home features? Again, I almost always check unknown unless I know for sure there are, but like a Ring doorbell is a smart home feature. If yes or unknown, seller will identify all smart home features in writing within 3 business days of the effective date. In addition, seller will provide all necessary information to buyer to access the smart home features at closing, unless otherwise agreed in writing. This probably gets violated on like 90% of the contracts. Like, I don't know if people say yes, no, maybe on these, but if there's a Ring doorbells are on how many houses? Like, you know anybody? I don't have a Ring doorbell. I don't know anybody else who doesn't though. I'm like the only person probably in the room who doesn't have a Ring doorbell. And that's a smart home feature, and that probably this addendum never gets written. So be a good agent, write the addendum or expect the addendum. And the important language in here is that the seller will provide the information necessary for buyer to access the smart home feature at closing, right? Because what good is having it if you can't get into it, right? What is going on here? Okay. Wood stove, wood burning fireplace insert. Does a property contain a wood stove or wood burning fireplace insert? Yes, no. They don't give you the unknown on this one. If yes, they give it to you here. If yes, is the wood stove, wood burning fireplace insert certified? So as part of the Clean Air Act, every wood stove or wood stove insert or fireplace insert is supposed to have like a catalytic converter built into it. And if it doesn't, then it needs to be removed from the property. Now, what's a fireplace insert? Like, there's a lot of conjecture on that. Like, who lives in an apartment? Who's lived in an apartment? I have. We all have, probably, right? And in your apartment was the fireplace built in place with brick and mortar? They have a mason come out and do it. Yours did. Most of the apartments I've lived in, it's like an inserted one. You know, it's like a prefab that's sitting in there. I don't know how that prefab applies to this law. Like, I've lived in homes where I have like a wood burning stove that's freestanding, right? And if I looked at the back of that, I could see the year that was built, and I could see the serial number on it. I could go to a website and see if that complies with the Clean Air Act or not. But there are also those kind of wood stovey things that are inserted, you know, that kind of protrude out from the regular. I think that's what this is made for. I think this is what that applies to, not to a prefabricated fireplace, but it doesn't really say either way. So it's open to interpretation. Like, imagine pulling out one of those prefabricated fireplaces from, like, you couldn't do it, right? It's not possible to pull that out of a house. But removing a wood burning stove from the existing fireplace or the freestanding wood burning stove, that's something that has to be done. There's an addendum goes along with it. And the addendum, the buyer can take the responsibility for removing it, which is what I see most often happening. And then the buyer never does. So the buyer just keeps it. And there's not, at this point, the feds aren't running around looking to see if they've been removed. Okay. Home warranties. Home warranty plans may be available to help cover homeowners' costs or repair or replace certain home systems and appliances. See specific plans for details. Will the plan be purchased for the buyer as part of this transaction? Yes, no. If yes, identify the plan and cost to be paid for by or sell by buyer or seller. I always do no on this, even if I don't love home warranties. I think that they are overvalued. I think like every insurance plan, the insurance company's motive is not to pay. They want to collect, but not pay. And so that's why I don't love home warranties, and I don't oversell them to a client. Like if the one's being offered to my buyer client, obviously I'd say take it. But I would never say like, let's lean on this to get things fixed for you, because I would be worried. I don't like to, I have no control over what happens after they pick up the phone and call the home warranty company. So I don't know what kind of service they're going to get. I don't know what kind of service the home warranty company is going to provide my clients. So I don't want to bank on it. Like I don't ever want that repair being tied to my reputation, because I don't think it's going to hold up. It's not like it's going to stand up to my reputation. So I don't purchase them for my clients, and I don't suggest them being purchased for my clients. If somebody wants to give them to me, or if a client who really likes it, more power to them, go for it. In a competitive offer situation, I've seen it where people will put that in here. Like they'll say, oh, $500 should be paid for by the seller. And I'm always like, you're going to lose a deal over $500? That's crazy. Like, don't put it in. Like, buy it for your client yourself, whatever, negotiate it at inspection. There's a lot of times where this can be addressed. So I would implore you, just no is the answer. Okay. Let's stop here. Let's give you guys a few minutes of break here before Tanya comes in. And we'll start fresh on this escrow section here and go through all this. Okay. Does that work for everybody? Okay. You're welcome.